We have some breaking legal news, Justin. The Justice Department is calling off one of its most controversial investigations. U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro says she is closing their probe into Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, saying the Fed's Inspector General will now look into cost overruns for the bank's renovation project. The question, could it clear the way for Trump's new Fed nominee to get through Senate confirmation? So where does this all go next? Let's bring in MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Dilanian, and back with us our White House reporter Jake Traylor and legal analyst Catherine Christian. So, Ken, what do we know about this decision?
Let me be clear about something, Anna. This is a complete surrender and withdrawal by Jeanine Pirro, because the Inspector General at the Federal Reserve has already been evaluating this project. You can go on their website. They tell you what they're working on. They've been routinely, as a matter of course, evaluating and examining the cost overruns, as they would do as normal, on this massive multi-billion-dollar renovation project of the Federal Reserve's headquarters. So the idea that she's somehow launching a new Inspector General investigation to replace the closing of her criminal investigation, that just doesn't make any sense, because, again, they're already reviewing, and there's no sense from the people I've been talking to about this that they are seeing anything criminal involved in this cost overrun issue at the headquarters renovation. So what's happened here is that, under pressure from a lot of people, including senators involved in the confirmation process, Jeanine Pirro has backed down and is withdrawing this criminal investigation, which even her own prosecutor admitted at one point that there was no evidence that Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve, did anything criminally wrong. And so now she is withdrawing from the field. And this is really interesting, because it's at a time when she is clearly trying to become the next Attorney General. She's essentially auditioning, as some of the other candidates are, Todd Blanche and others. And now she is essentially walking away from this controversial investigation that was holding up Donald Trump's nominee to become the next Fed chair.
Jake, any reaction there at the White House so far?
Yeah, not yet. I'm tempted to go knock on the door behind me, but we've not heard from the president yet on this news. I will just reiterate a lot of what Ken said, if it's really notable, which is that Pirro, all the folks that we talked to inside the White House about this ongoing probe for so long, despite any clear criminal evidence to pursue it, all along was Pirro really doing it at the behest of President Trump, and that back and forth of trying to impress President Trump. Likely, though, a large hurdle to actually get the confirmation needed here. So that's what our understanding is at the moment. The president, of course, we know, has for a long time been very frustrated with Jerome Powell. He's not hidden any of that. There have been many somewhat viral moments over the past few months where the two have gone back and forth at each other here. I will say myself and my colleague Jackie Alemany have for a couple of weeks now been chasing that this probe would actually end up not going anywhere. But we spoke with multiple White House officials over the past few weeks who continued saying, no, this is going to go through. This is something the president wants to see done. This is something that Jeanine Pirro is going to oversee and is going to ultimately happen. So to see it all of a sudden dissipate in this way, exactly as Ken said, is quite the flip for Pirro and for the White House here. But likely it was something that, at the behest of many others around the president, said this is ultimately best to move along in the future confirmation of the Fed chair.
We are chasing more reaction from the White House, from Capitol Hill, and from, of course, those in kind of the financial world, as we just covered the confirmation hearing for the next Fed chair nominee, Kevin Warsh, this week. And Senator Thom Tillis said, I'm not going to advance this nomination if this DOJ probe is still open. I wonder, Catherine, what does this tell you about the strength of the case the prosecutors had? Would they be closing it if they had actual evidence of any criminal wrongdoing, do you think?
No, and it's everything Ken said. And Jeanine Pirro knows better. She was a district attorney in New York for many years. As a prosecutor, you do not open a criminal investigation unless you have a good faith basis to believe that a crime has been committed. And that clearly was not in this case. And it was the ethical thing to do for her to close it, though she adds a zinger in her statement that she might reopen it if the facts warrant. Well, yes, if there are facts that she suddenly finds that there's crimes been committed, yes, that would be appropriate. But this should have never been a criminal investigation.
Yeah, she says, I've directed my office to close our investigation as the IG undertakes this inquiry. Note well, however, I will not hesitate to restart a criminal investigation should the facts weren't doing so. Ken, you touched on how she may want to become the next attorney general. We also have reported this week, you reported, that acting Attorney General Todd Blanche is in some ways auditioning for that role to become permanent as well. Do you have any insight into whether Todd Blanche was involved at all in this decision to close the probe, to hand it over to the IG's office?
I don't at the moment, Anna, because this just happened and I haven't had a chance to do any reporting on it. But it is notable that Jeanine Pirro has taken a number of actions on her own. U.S. attorneys can be and can operate quite independently from Main justice, depending on how far out on a limb they want to go. And Pirro, for example, recently decided to move to drop the cases against the January 6th attackers who had been convicted of seditious conspiracy. It's not clear that she consulted with Todd Blanche or the White House when she made that decision either. So if I was betting, I would suggest that she didn't consult with Blanche. She's been operating as a lone actor on a lot of different matters, but we need to do some more reporting to figure that out.
Jake, there's no doubt this looks like Trump backing down after a GOP senator vowed to block his Fed nominee over this investigation. Is there concern in the White House that this could lead to other Republicans now taking a stand, seeing that this was an effective way to go about pushing back?
I mean, likely so, Anna. I think if we just look at the past couple of weeks, particularly even with a separate category, but with Iran, as we continue to see more and more Republicans, if at first privately, eventually publicly voice some concern and constraint regarding the president's actions, there continues to seem to be a more of a concerted effort to do just so, especially because, and I'll say this again, but I think it's notable, just weeks ago, initially Jackie and I were poking around asking folks, is this probe really going to go through if, as Republicans are saying, it's going to hold up that confirmation of Warsh? And they continue to say, no, this is something the president feels strongly about. This is something that Pirro feels strongly about. To see this reversal so quickly, I think clearly does indicate that there is some reckoning or revelation, at least amongst the president, where he's saying, okay, to actually get this through, there has to be some form of concession. And I'd say in the now minutes and hours preceding this, it's going to be really interesting to see how the president and how the White House choose to spin this moment that is just a clear different approach than what they were doing literally just days ago.
Also in this post that was put out by Jeanine Pirro, she says the IG has the authority to hold the Federal Reserve accountable to American taxpayers. I'll just note that the building renovations are not coming from any kind of taxpayer money. It's not the way it works with the central bank. But, Catherine, we were just discussing in another segment the role of an inspector general, in that case the watchdog over the Justice Department. Here, does the IG have any real levers to hold anybody accountable legally?
No, it's an audit, which is an investigation light, as we discussed. You can make a recommendation if the IG were to find criminal activity, and I think probably won't, because Jeanine Pirro has basically admitted there is no criminal activity. The IG can recommend a prosecution, but generally it's recommending best practices. You did not engage in best practices. Here are some recommendations for best practices. That's if the IG finds any wrongdoing in this case.
And the IG comes out with a report, right? Could this report expose how potentially baseless the original investigation was?
Exactly. If this IG is ethical and honest and finds those facts that this was a baseless investigation, that the report should say that. And it will, sort of come back to haunt Jeanine Pirro and the administration if the IG finds that.
Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. It's 4 o'clock in New York. For the sake of our 250-year experiment in democracy and the health and safety of our people, might it be high time to start managing Donald Trump's screen time? Before we try to answer that question, you should know this. Donald Trump appeared to have another urgent meeting yesterday with the back of his eyelids. It took place during an event on healthcare affordability in the Oval Office, because who needs a white noise machine, or melatonin for that matter, when you've got important policy matters to help you drift off to la-la land? For anyone else, the solution to such frequent occasions of falling asleep in public might be a better, more sound night's sleep, even in the midst of a war that he started. But no. Hours later, between the hours of midnight and 2:45 a.m., Donald Trump posted on social media 18 times by our count, picking back up again just after 7:30 a.m. And none of those posts were really anything pressing. None of them were things that couldn't wait till a morning tirade. In the 2-minute span encompassing 12:27 a.m. and 12:28 a.m. Eastern, for instance, Donald Trump posted 4 times on the topics of treason charges for former President Barack Obama and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. 45 minutes later, at 1:13 a.m., he posted this, quote, "The 2020 presidential election should be permanently wiped from the books and be of no further force or effect." An hour and a half later, at 2:43 a.m., either still awake or awake again, he shared a fawning quote from legendary actor Clint Eastwood. Although we checked on that quote from that legendary actor, and it appears the quote was actually from a New Hampshire state representative from the year 2019. So much for that. Trump seemed to clock out of his social media with a final post 2 minutes later at 2:45 a.m. before picking it up again and starting to post on social media again just after 7:30 a.m. Donald Trump has appeared to fall asleep at White House events before, a number of times over the past few months. In fact, it might be one of the reasons the latest polling makes some sense. This in Fox News' poll, for instance, shows that 55% of registered American voters say they do not believe Donald Trump has the mental soundness to serve effectively as president. That number is up 7 points since late 2024. Now, these facts might only rise to the level of disturbing were we living in the best of times, but at the end of the 8th week of the war with Iran and amid a slew of other major challenges on the economy and on, Donald Trump is facing head-on a criticism he and his allies levied against his predecessor on a near daily basis, that he's simply not up to the job he has or even on the job often enough to perform it adequately. That is where we start today with Media Matters for America President Angelo Carusone. Also joining us, former Trump White House Deputy Press Secretary and Home of the Brave spokesperson, Sarah Matthews, is back with us. She's now a contributor for The Bulwark. And with me at the table, host of Politics Nation, president of the National Action Network, the Reverend Al Sharpton's here. Sarah, I'm so happy to have you back and to see you. Just tell me, I feel like there's this debate that rages about whether he's worse than he was. I feel like he seems in a lot of ways as crazy as ever, but you worked for him. You were inside the White House. Tell me how he seems to you.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that largely, that this is not anything new when it comes to this erratic posting and him posting unhinged things. I just think it's gotten even worse in the sense that it's a little bit more extreme. In the first administration, we didn't have him posting about wanting to annihilate an entire civilization. And so I think that there's something to be said that it seems like he's lost his fastball and that he's not beating Father Time. Look, you can't beat Father Time. And I think old age is catching up with him. And so he's not as on it and as sharp as he once was. And I think that is also just enhancing the craziness that was already kind of there and bringing it to a whole new level. And we're seeing that play out.
Sarah, do you think he's cognizant of the questions being asked about his faculties? 71% of all Americans don't believe he has the temperament to be president. 55% of Americans don't believe he has the mental fitness for the job that he has. He seemed to be so focused on those things when he'd constantly take the MoCA test, which is a dementia screen. Not really the intellectual flex that he seems to think it is, with Fox News interviewers and all manner of people. But do you think he's following these polls this time?
Yeah, I do. I think that's why he is constantly flexing this cognitive test and bragging about how he aced it, even though it's not really that much of an accomplishment. Anyone could ace it as long as you don't have dementia or onset early dementia. And I think he is following it. And I think he does feel insecure about how the public perceives him and his old age. Look, he was very critical of his predecessor and calling him Sleepy Joe Biden and going after his mental acuity. And so I do think that he is following these polls, and that's why you see him out there trying to push back on this narrative. But when he's falling asleep in the Oval Office in these meetings and posting these erratic, unhinged things on his Truth Social, it's certainly not helping the public perception of him and if he's mentally sound for the job. And I do think, too, that in the first Trump administration, that people were willing to give him a little bit longer of a leash and they tolerated the kind of craziness from him. But we're not seeing that so much in the second administration, because I think so many people that voted for him this time around are unhappy with him, as reflected in the polling, where he's hitting record lows of disapproval because people feel like they have buyer's remorse, that they're not getting what they were promised on the campaign trail, whether that be him getting us into a new war in the Middle East, something he said he wouldn't do, or him not bringing down prices and actually making prices skyrocket even higher, whether that's grocery prices or the price of gas, you name it. And so I think that people aren't going to be as tolerant of this kind of crazy behavior from him when they feel like he isn't doing a good job.
Can I ask the control room just to put the picture back up one more time of him falling asleep? I mean, if someone were sitting on the set and fell asleep, like, I would send a text and ask someone to come out and bring them a coffee. Like, whose job is it to either kick the press out, Sarah, or like kick him under the table? Or, I mean, is it the instruction for, and it looks like Lutnick, Oz, and Kennedy, I guess they pass for our health people these days. Like, is it one of their job to like wake him up? Or like, what's the, Trump's so obsessed with his appearance. Like, we know from the Atlantic, he didn't go honor troops who lost their lives serving in World War I because he didn't want to mess up his hair. Like, the whole room can see him asleep. Whose job is it in this White House to wake him up or get the press out so we don't have all these images of Donald Trump asleep at his desk?
Yeah, it's horrible optics, like you mentioned, and something that he would obviously care about. And I feel like it's kind of surprising that, honestly, the press team wasn't there to wrangle the press. Like, they always have a press wrangler who's on site for these types of Oval Office events, and they're in charge of wrangling the media and getting them in and out of the room. And they're usually the person you hear cut the reporters off, and they're yelling, okay, time to get out, and pushing them out the door when they feel like the press conference has gone on too long, or the president has to get to another engagement. And so you would think that someone on the press team would see him falling asleep and would have the thought to think, maybe we need to get the press wrangler in there to cut this short, or have someone pass him a note, whatever it is. But obviously that isn't happening. So it's a little surprising that they wouldn't be more on top of it.
Did he fall asleep in the first term a lot in meetings, or does that appear to be happening more frequently?
I think it's happening more frequently. I don't think it's something that happened as often. I mean, if you look back on videos of Trump in 2016 and even throughout his first term, he had so much more vigor and life to him, and was always like the Energizer Bunny, in my opinion. I mean, the guy just could run on very little sleep and just go and hit multiple campaign events in one day. But I don't think you're seeing that as much. And I do think that's just his old age catching up to him. Look, he turns 80 next month. And so it's definitely something that I don't think he wants to admit. Obviously, anyone struggles with realizing and accepting the fact that you're getting older. And this is a very demanding job. And so when you're sleeping for 4 hours a night, he can't perform in the same way that he once was able to. And so him not sleeping through the night and posting on Twitter back in the day, or Truth Social now, that's not really anything new. It seems like it's happening more frequently. But then I think that that's contributing to him also falling asleep more frequently in these meetings now, because he can't perform in the same way on that little sleep that he maybe once was able to in his younger age.
Trump is facing now this approval crash. The trend is clear over basically the second term. And you can see we're very divided. Sometimes things move a little slowly, but it's now accelerated after the Iran war and the gas crunch. Trump is actually in a worse spot than any president in the modern era, the last 3 decades. 6 months out from the election now, with the midterms coming, only a third of Americans really approve of what's going on. The number is falling. Come November, he could face a midterm wipeout that goes beyond just what we might call a correction. I mean, even Republicans in office don't say they're going to hold the House. There is a thought they could lose the House by a good margin, maybe even lose the Senate. Or it could be worse than that. The kind of blue wave that will seal Trump as a lame duck, have his whole party and the markets looking well past him for the following 2 years, or as big as what Obama discussed as the 2010 shellacking.
I'm not recommending for every future president that they take a shellacking like I did last night. I'm sure there are easier ways to learn these lessons.
Now, Obama's approval at the time was about 50%, which again gives you the context of just how bad Trump is doing. That's a 17-point gap, and there was still a revolt. Things are also more dire for the president when you look at specific issues. One other difference, and the reason why the number of decades you go back makes it a harder comparison, is that the Congress can be more redistricted and gerrymandered, so sometimes it takes a bigger wave election to make up for the same number of seats. But Republicans have been losing their effort to rig through redistricting, including that setback this week. So if there is a free and fair open election, it is looking bad. Now, as mentioned, on the economy, when you break it out, Trump is polling worse than Biden's lowest mark on high prices and inflation. So anything Republicans have ever said about Biden and how the country rejected him on that applies to Trump now, and worse. In 2024, high prices was blamed on Biden, and this was seen as a huge factor going into the Democrats' November loss.
Rising fuel and food costs have angered many Americans heading into the midterm elections, putting Democrats' control of the House and Senate at risk.
Inflation continues to take a major bite out of our pocketbooks. Since Biden took office, prices are up nearly 18%.
1 year into a Biden presidency, they aren't happy.
Yeah. To fill my car in the beginning, it was $30. Now it's $70.
Bidenomics has not been a compelling and resonant a term or package in the minds of a lot of voters.
Voters looked at incumbents. That was the Biden-Harris team, and they made their displeasure known. In 2008, Americans held George Bush and the whole party responsible for something that was partly attributed to them because incumbents are in charge and Republicans had vastly deregulated the financial markets. They were cozy with Wall Street. So when Wall Street blew it, well, the public was mad and they took it out, the economic pain, on the GOP.
Meltdown. The American financial system is rocked to its foundation.
Lehman Brothers is going bankrupt.
We're working to reduce disruptions and minimize the impact of these financial market developments on the broader economy.
Bush was in office for 8 years, ain't do nothing but ran the country down.
The Republican Party is getting a drubbing tonight.
Our friend James right there, a beat guest. So that's what happens with even what they call macro events, where everyone kind of knows, well, a financial crisis that was complicated, it might have been years in the making. It's not all and only one party's fault, and yet I told you why they held Republicans accountable. But some things are all one person's decision. And that's the case when it comes to starting a war in Iran, which now has gas prices up, inflation worse, no end game. Even when we get the Strait open, it could be months till your gas prices go back down. And a lot of experts saying the U.S. is literally in a worse position than before the war started. Well, everyone knows one person, Donald Trump, started that war.
I think there's a lot of frustration with President Trump right now. Obviously, the left hates him. But you've got 80% of independents who are against this war, who I don't think are enjoying his little parlor games.
We're implicated in this for sure.
Yes.
It's not enough to say, well, I changed my mind, or like, oh, this is bad, I'm out.
We're supposed to just sit here and love this crap. It's just poll numbers go straight down, and all the polls show the Republicans are going to lose the midterms in 7 months by a landslide. A disaster. A total and complete disaster.
Now, if you don't take all those people's word for it, or you think they're not credible on some issues, definitely the case with Mr. Jones, then why believe them on this? And so here, on a factual news program, we will match what the right is hearing, because that's going to matter to them, and whether they stay home, etc., with the facts. A third of Republicans, according to the polling, now disapprove of Trump. The resilient MAGA base no longer resilient. That's worse than the numbers of the last Republican president who was trying to defend a different unpopular war in the Middle East, but one that was actually, by comparison to this, much more methodically presented to the public and the Congress. There was a whole vote and debate. And George W. Bush still had, by the end of all of that, a 27% approval rating, a disapproval rating, in his party, 65% approve. The bottom line is that they also had an unpopular war, but Bush was not as opposed by his party as Trump is now. In other words, anytime you hear someone say, well, Trump's got this resilient base and it's more resilient than others, fact check, false. And again, first term Trump, they were resilient even as they lost the midterms. Second term Trump, no. George W. Bush, who might be a less voluble, loud, Trumpy, braggy person, actually was stronger with his base now than Trump. New York Times notes GOP moderates were warning Bush had to basically show gains on the Iraq issue, and it was bad enough that all of this was being discussed in depth as people were waking up on a less political environment, drinking their coffee, getting the kids ready for school, watching the Today Show.
11 Republican congressmen brought up to the solarium. They said, Mr. President, this war is a problem for us in our districts. People are talking about it. They want us to figure out exactly how long we're going to be there, what is going to happen. You need to come clean with us, be blunt with us, be candid with us. These are GOP moderates. They are swing voters. If they go the other way, if they turn against the president on Iraq and join with the Democrats, the president understands he's in real political trouble.
That was the political trouble. It was well known. And Trump is in a worse spot than that. In Bush's case, he started with a lot of Americans behind the war. There was a post 9/11 unity. And again, as I mentioned, but it really bears contrast, they spent months trying to explain why they were going to go to the Middle East, what this was about, what the case was, even if later it proved faulty. And they held a true bipartisan vote in the Congress. That is decidedly not the case with Trump rushing the country into war with Iran without so much as a national address or congressional vote. The fallout is clear. There's no end in sight. Gas prices up more than $1 per gallon since Trump, on his own, started the war. Presidents facing big problems like this and surging gas prices often discuss how we got into this, sympathy for the public, how they're going to address it. I feel your pain was an old saying. And that's not Trump.
We're having serious times. Families are squeezed by the high price of gasoline and feeling the pinch of food prices.
If you told me that we were going to be at only $92 a barrel, $92 a barrel, I would have been very surprised.
All right.
And you know what? I'm very happy.
I want gas prices lower because they hurt families. Filling up this gas tank gets more and more painful, and it's a tax out of their pocketbooks.
How much longer will Americans continue to see these high gas prices?
Well, they're not very high.
Another challenge that families are facing, and the one I think they're most focused on right now, high gas prices. This is a problem.
I said, yeah, it's going to hurt the market, and it's going to drive up the price of oil and whatever it is, but that's peanuts.
Peanuts. There's more than one way to do a job. There's more than one way to be president. Donald Trump may have benefited from a kind of collective amnesia going into 2024 where people were mad about the high prices and didn't remember how he is, what he does, whether he really cares about the words coming out of his mouth, whether he's really going to look out for you. Well, they remember now. And when you talk about more than one way to be president, look at the approval numbers. The American public, including a lot of independents, conservatives, and some Republicans, have decided the way Trump is doing his job is worse than every president in living memory.
The Trump administration is now working to strip hundreds of people of their American citizenship. The New York Times reports that the Justice Department has identified 384 foreign-born Americans whose citizenship it wants to revoke. It's not clear at all why these individuals are being targeted. The Times also reports there's a push to fast-track the process, giving the cases to prosecutors in dozens of U.S. attorneys' offices across the country. Former Senator Barbara Boxer is back with me. Also joining us, Veronica Cardenas, and immigration lawyer and former assistant chief counsel for ICE. Veronica, Between 2017 and 2025, the government sought to strip just over 120 naturalized Americans of their citizenship. But before Trump was elected, this was not common, an average of just 11 people a year. What do you think is going on here? And do you have any idea why they're targeting these folks?
I think this is a continuation of this administration's rhetoric. They're going after the worst of the worst. Then they were going after non-citizens who didn't have criminal convictions. And now they're going after naturalized citizens. And it's creating a second-class citizenship for people who've naturalized. We've seen him do this push with birthright citizenship. So there's this message to immigrants who've made it to citizenship that they are still not safe. Now, it's not clear why these people were targeted or why they have been identified, but when you look back to that January 2025 memo that this administration created, it had 10 grounds for revocation or denaturalization. One of them was significantly important to pursue. That is so vague and open-ended, and so that could really be used arbitrarily just to meet certain quotas.
Well, can I ask you about the quotas? Because as I understand it, DHS staffers have been ordered to refer upwards of 200 denaturalized cases a month to DOJ. I mean, what do you even do with that?
Right. And this just looks like it's on the books to show that they're doing something to create a fear amongst citizens who've been in this country for many years. When we look at prior administrations and who they targeted, they were targeting war crime criminals, like in Nazi Germany. They're targeting people who have committed heinous crimes, that they did not disclose that on their naturalization citizenship forms. But now we don't
Because we should help people understand, if you have a serious criminal record, you're not going to become a naturalized citizen under the process as it stands.
Exactly. And if you lied on that application and you didn't disclose that, there should be consequences. But what this administration is doing is something more than that, because they're going through all of these applications. And the application process is a very long process. It's very complicated. There may be mistakes on that application, but it didn't mean that they intended to defraud the government. So our saving grace here is that this process is before U.S. District Court judges that don't have to follow this administration's rules. We've seen this administration be good in getting cases before judges it thinks it's going to be friendly to its rules, but I think this one's going to be a hard sell to denaturalize the amount of people that they're going to push through this process.
Senator, becoming a U.S. citizen, as you just pointed out, is a long and legal process. What message does this administration send if they're targeting people who did the right thing? They actually went through this process. They studied. They passed a test.
Listen, it's putting fear in the hearts of good, decent citizens. And I want to tell you why this topic touches my heart. I am the daughter of a naturalized citizen. My darling mother was brought here when she was 9 months old in her parents' arms, escaping terrible prejudice in Europe. And I want to tell your audience this, Chris. When she passed away, I had a little jewel box. It had two things in it that she wanted me to treasure. One was her wedding band, and the other was her certificate of naturalization wrapped in saran wrap as a message to me: protect this at all costs. This is, and I so agree with what's been said, it's a continuation of what Trump is doing to people who were not born here and who are good, decent people. Oh, he was going to get the worst of the worst and deport them. Instead, he's getting farm workers, nurses, decent people. And if it wasn't for our own population coming to their rescue, Lord knows where we would be. And when you set up a quota, and I believe it was 200 people a month, this is more, to me, ethnic cleansing. I hate to say it, but it sickens me to my core.
I'm guessing because of the moving story you just told us about your mom, you've been to a few naturalization ceremonies. Anybody who has ever been to one, I've heard it often. They can't believe, they say, how much more these new American citizens know about their country, about our laws, about its history than they know, having grown up here. And it's a very moving thing to see. A lot of tears are shed. And then you have the president posting a transcript from a right-wing podcast on Truth Social in which the host referred to China and India as hellhole places and claimed recent immigrants had almost no loyalty to America. Is that what you've seen?
Quite the opposite. You know, it's just like if you know anyone who converted to a religion and you're of that religion and they become more religious, more excited, they're so honored and pleased, and America means everything. I mean, my mother and dad, they used to say, and my dad was the only, he was born in America, but his 8 other siblings were born in Russia. And they both used to say, when I complained about taxes or anything else, they'd say, kiss the ground of America, kiss the ground of America. And when I got to Congress and my mother was still alive, I cannot tell you the emotion. So the point is, these are the people that love this country so much. They know about the politics. They understand our Constitution. And to go after these people, it is a high bar you're supposed to meet in order to denaturalize. But they're going to try to change that. So we need a check and balance on this president. I'll close with this. We have a chance to stand up for what's right in this country in these upcoming elections. Otherwise, he's going to continue to go down this path of hurting good, decent, hardworking people.
I'll just say that my goddaughter, who was brought here from China and became a naturalized citizen, loved this country so much, she joined the military and continues to serve to this day in the Army. Former Senator Barbara Boxer, Veronica Cardenas, thank you both very much.
So, President Trump has dinner plans tomorrow night with an unlikely group of table mates. For the first time in either of his 2 terms, Trump will attend the White House Correspondents Association annual dinner. It's a tradition dates back to 1921 that is intended to champion the First Amendment and press freedom. Let's bring in MS Now legal affairs reporter Fallon Gallagher, who has new analysis for MS.Now titled, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? The Guy You'll See in Court. Fallon, take it away.
Yeah, Jonathan, it's really significant that the president's coming. We know that he's planning remarks. He's working with a comedian. We don't know what that's going to look like, whether he'll roast the press, whether he'll roast himself. But what we can expect is that this is probably going to be a pretty awkward dinner arrangement. And that is because the president is battling with the press corps in courtrooms, not spending time with them in dining rooms. And so, of course, there's always been tension between the president and the press corps. We saw that during Trump 1. We've been using the phrase fake news for over a decade now. But this is different because I'm looking at a lot of the litigation that's happening in Trump 2.0. I cover all of these cases very closely. And a big chunk of them can really be boiled down to the president versus the press. And so I looked at all of these cases, and they really fall into 2 categories. And the first is actions, often legal actions, that the president is taking to target journalists. Now, of course, a couple weeks ago in the briefing room when he was talking about that Iranian downed fighter jet, or sorry, the American downed fighter jet in Iran, he threatened to jail the journalist who first reported on that, to find the leaker there. That was a clear escalation in a fight that we've seen in recent weeks. Now, of course, there's also been lawsuits. He filed a defamation suit against the Wall Street Journal for its reporting that the president had penned a note in the Jeffrey Epstein birthday book that was coupled with a naked drawing of a woman. We later saw that birthday book, and there was a note that fit that description with the president's signature on it. So he sued them for defamation. A judge threw out that suit last week, saying that the president hadn't met the actual malice standard that you need for defamation against public officials. But then most notably, the biggest attack that we've seen legally from the president and this administration towards the press was, of course, the indictment of journalists Don Lemon and Georgia Fort for their role in covering an anti-ICE protest in St. Paul, Minnesota. So that's one big chunk, and we're seeing a lot of cases like that. That's just a few of them. But then the other chunk is a series where the press is fighting back for systematic restrictions that this administration is taking against the press. Now, of course, there were those executive orders that defunded NPR and PBS. You saw both of those organizations fight back in court and get a judge to block that action, calling it unconstitutional. But you also saw the president's systematic dismantling of Voice America, which has been around since World War II to combat propaganda globally. And so a judge last month blocked that action. Of course, the administration is appealing that, and that'll go for argument soon. The other big one here, though, that we've been covering pretty extensively here at MS Now is the Pentagon press case. The administration over at the Pentagon instituted that new restrictive press policy, basically limiting the way that the press can actually operate, where they can go, whether or not they need an escort, but also what they can report. Of course, you'll remember that first restrictive policy had limits on whether or not the press could publish information that was coming from anonymous sources. So that was really notable. The New York Times, of course, sued there, and a judge in a really scathing ruling blocked that action, ordered that the Pentagon needed to reinstate those press passes to all of those reporters who opted to turn in their press pass instead of sign on to that restrictive policy that the judge said violated the First Amendment. But all of these are the backdrop, and these cases are still ongoing as this president is set to go to dinner, which makes us wonder, maybe he's trying to view this as a sort of detente. Jonathan?
I'm going to go the other way on that. Fallon, I think that, first of all, it's a really important list. I'm glad you raised it. I think far more likely President Trump's going to take some sort of victory lap at this dinner, which I would argue a very problematic dinner. You just outlined part of the reasons why, indeed, he's filing a lawsuit against multiple news organizations. We should not forget that his administration conducted a raid of a Washington Post reporter's home, and this week we learned investigated a New York Times reporter. We know this president likes to insult and demean reporters all the time. We know that he has cut press access. You mentioned the Pentagon, also at the White House, reshaped the pool, kicked reporters out to portions of the West Wing. He has put the press attacks on the press at the center of his second campaign here. And Eugene Robinson, look, I'm a proud member of the White House Correspondents Association, which does incredible work, and the dinner does raise money for scholarships for journalists. We can do that another way. I think that this dinner, the time for this dinner expired, I would argue, long ago, and particularly this year, it is deeply fraught.
Yeah, I'm skipping all the events this weekend, and I would happily write a check to support the scholarship efforts, and I think a lot of members of the Washington Press Corps would also do the same. This just seems beyond awkward. There is this actual war going on between the free press, which is enshrined in the First Amendment, and this president, and it just strikes me as inappropriate, awkward. And I don't see what good is going to come from this. We'll see. Fallon, do we expect him to stick to the script? Last night tomorrow night he's having a comedian write jokes for him. I cannot remember a time when the president has stuck to the script. Do we think he'll do so tomorrow night?
I mean, like you said, this is a president who never sticks to the script. He always ad-libs, but this is also a speech that he's writing with jokes that he's working with a comedian on. I think what I'll be most looking for is whether or not these jokes are lighthearted or whether the roast is more on the attack end of the spectrum.
All right. Well, the new piece available online now at ms.now. MS Now legal affairs reporter Fallon Gallagher. Thank you so much. And Ashley, final word to you on this, but it does seem to be sort of an incongruous celebration of the First Amendment with someone who is restricting press access repeatedly.
Absolutely. But can I leave on a positive note? Because I think this is very interesting. We have the two biggest parties this weekend are Grindr. It's the hardest ticket. They're doing their inaugural party. And the executive branch, which is the Trump sons who started this exclusive club. And both of those, it just shows you how polarizing D.C. is, because those are the hottest parties.
All right. Well, there we go. Ashley Davis, thank you so much. Eugene Robinson, great to see you, my friend. Thank you as well.